Okay, so now that we have a basis starting point for the artifact shading and the overall scene lighting, let's move on to work on the particles. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to do the same thing here. So let's create a geometry container, RNDR core, and again, color red. Let's go here. Typically, I would definitely go with the caching step of the process. So we would go here and do some cleanup with an attribute delete. I'm gonna turn on delete none selected, and I'm just gonna go and keep the color, keep the velocity, keep the ID, keep whatever. What else? We do have the age norm, speed norm. So yeah, we would keep basically this. If I middle mouse button, you'll see we have these attributes plus a point group that I also don't need. So I would go with the group delete as well. Delete everything. And then I would cache. Okay, so at this point, we would use a file cache and cache it. Next, on the other object, the other geometry container, I would use a file node to load whatever I cache from there. But since this is kind of going in real time pretty fast, I'm not going to cache. Save myself some disk space. Just going to put a null out core parts or particles. And instead here, I will use an object merge and just bring in the particles. Let's call this get particles. You can choose to actually control some of these features after the pop network and just do the out particles here and include these elements here. It's all good. Doesn't really matter. It's going to give you exactly the same result. It's however you prefer. So for now, I'm going to keep working, adjusting things here. And this one is just going to be for rendering purposes. And I'm not going to adjust anything in particular here. So we have the particles being loaded. Now that we have the particles being loaded, let's see how we can render them. So the first step to render particles inside Houdini with Redshift is you have to make sure that you go to the Redshift object tab and you go to particles section and render object as particles. Otherwise, they won't be rendered out. The other thing that I want to make sure we do is go to here. So I just pressed 3 to make use of the shortcut key that we created. And here on the Redshift drop, I'm going to make sure that the objects here, the candidate objects, I'm going to say it's only RNDR objects are renderable. And for lighting, on only LGT lights are to be considered. I'm going to keep this as candidate objects because I'm not going to force everything right away. Sometimes at this point, I'm going to be using one or the other object, maybe two, maybe not, maybe just one. Same thing for the lights. So I'm going to keep this all in candidate sections. Let's see how this looks. For lighting, let's give it a try with both lights and see how this is looking. Okay, not exactly what I was expecting at least. So I'm gonna close this and go to the core dev. We do have size here. I did delete the P scale and that's why that's happening. So we do want to keep P scale as well. So this will give us a different result for sure. Okay, so now we have particles being rendered, no color, nothing. So we want to work on the color and on the shader for the particles. Again, I'm going to hit 2 on this side and I'm going to create an RS material builder and I'm going to call this core particles. Inside, I'm going to make use of the user vector data. Just to load the color for now. Color. And here, let's put this in color. So at least now we should have the color as soon as we apply the material. So I'm going to apply the material directly here. Okay. And we should see the color appear. Okay, now we have the color. So everything seems to be working well. At 50%, we have the all the attributes we need. So you can see that there's a size difference between particles. There's a color difference between particles. And this is working well so far. The other things that we're going to be adjusting are in terms of look. You can create your own looks, of course. The type of look that I'm going for is based on having a bit of self-illumination going on the particles. I do want this to seem like something with a lot of energy, and so kind of bright overall. So the idea is for them to have some self-illumination and little bit of transparency, so that when for us to actually have an opaque element, we need to have several particles overlapping each other. Okay, so that's the main principle of the shader that I'm going to be creating for the particles. So first, to start with that, I'm going to go to make sure that the color is actually connected to the self-illumination color as well. So here on the overall emission color. So now we have emission there. Still not doing anything, and the main reason for that is, let me just stop this for a moment and save just in case. So for us to be able to visualize something here, let me hit render again. I'm not really very concerned about having reflection on this. I know by default the reflection is at 1, and I'm not really interested in having reflection, but I do want to go to the overall and add some self-illumination. Start with 0.2. As you can see, they already go kind of brighter, and then I want to play with the opacity as well. So for this case, in this case, I'm gonna I tried different values, of course, and I was going with something 0.4, and maybe an emission that's can go maybe even lower than this, but for now I'm gonna keep this. Something like this. We can see a bit of the core, and then we have a weird shape. So what's happening at this point is that I don't really feel that the light is going through the particles as much as I would like. So what we could try, and these are pretty much just suggestions, but what we can try is always mix different things. You can choose to go with just this approach, or if you want to make things brighter, you can always go to the increase the emission or decrease the opacity. That's also another way to go. If you go to 0.1, you'll see we do have more interaction of the light with the particles. We kind of lose a lot of the volume, but this will give you some kind of more volumetric effect almost. So this is a different approach, but I kind of like it as well. So I do see a lot more of the heat of the core going through. Let me see if I increase the weight of the self-illumination. The problem with increasing the self-illumination too much is that you kind of lose the volumetric readability, because you won't have any shadows on it. But in this case, considering that the goal is for it to be pretty energetic, it makes sense for us to not have that many shadows. So something like this, I think this is a good balance. Another thing that you can try is consider the amount of particles that you actually have. It'll give you a very different look if you're rendering with less particles or more particles. And let's see how far we can take this. I'm going to press D on the viewport and go to geometry and make sure this is visualized as pixels. And on the core dev, I'm going to go to frame 0, and then here on the pop network, I'm going to try to increase this a bit. So by now we have, I think this is 100,000 particles per second. Let's try 1 million. Why not? And let's go to frame 96 or something like that. It should take a bit longer, but not too long. It's still a very fast system, very fast simulation. Okay, very opaque at this point, as you can see. But we should be able to kind of have a different result. We can even compare it. I'm gonna save this snapshot and render a new one. Okay, a lot more opacity here. So if we are kind of considering this many particles, maybe the opacity can actually come down a bit more, 0.02. Maybe this is too little opacity. You can check your alpha, see how much it's going. So yeah, not great. There is one concern that I have usually when rendering particles like this is that unfortunately the alpha isn't kind of being additive. It does seem to have an additive effect on the way it blocks light, but not on your final render. If you look at this, this is just one value that will correspond to the value that we have in here, most likely. So yeah, not ideal. This is something that I don't know if it's a missing feature or a bug or something, or if it's something that I'm setting up wrong, but I would like to have the alpha to be kind of additive. But yeah, that's not what's happening. So at this point, I think this is too many particles. So I'm just gonna stop this, go to the core, maybe not be as drastic. So instead of, let's go with 5. So instead of 100, which is what we had, let's go with 400, 4 times more than what we had on this example. So let's see what this gives us. Not a bad idea to kind of reset the simulation, make sure that everything is properly calculated, because I'm not sure if it was updating. When you see the bar as orange, then that's probably not a good sign. Just make sure that everything's updated. Okay, this one is okay. I think this is a good number. Let's try with a bit more opacity. 0.1, and again, it's a balance. You need to find out what works for you, and yeah. So I'll keep this shader and I'll keep this snapshot